save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize it and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. I often find myself drawn in the new year to this poem by Martha Postlethwaite, Clearing. I like to imagine the new year as a kind of new beginning, a fresh start, a clearing, if you will, where we can pause for a moment and center ourselves and prepare mentally and spiritually for the year to come. Because soon enough, our busy and complicated lives will rush in with resolutions and tasks and commitments and to-do lists. And if you ever feel yourself overwhelmed at this time of year, if you sometimes look to the challenges of the coming year, the challenges of your life, the challenges of our world, and find it all a bit too much, then maybe this sermon's for you. Because my message this morning is do what you can. Do what you can. It's the second in a series of 3 sermons inspired by the final sermon that my colleague Forrest Church preached to his congregation on the last sermon before he died. In his final message before succumbing to cancer, Church left the beloved community that he'd served for 30 years with these words. He said, "Above all, friends, want what you have, do what you can, and be who you are." Sounds kind of simple, right? But easier said than done. And when you unpack their meaning, each of these statements, want what you have, do what you can, be who you are, each is an invitation to us to lead a life of self-acceptance and gratitude and purpose. Now, 2 weeks ago, we talked about how wanting what we have, as opposed to always desiring what we lack, can free us from suffering and fill us with gratitude. This week, we move to the second part of Church's advice, which is do what you can. And just for some context, I think it's helpful to understand that when Forrest preached these words, do what you can, he was in the final stages of a long struggle with cancer. When he first received the diagnosis, he and his doctors tried everything possible to rid him of cancer, surgery, and radiation and chemo. And for a while, these treatments brought him more time and improved quality of life. In other words, he and his doctors did what they could. But by the time he preached this sermon, the cancer was back and no more treatment was available. Forrest had to confront the limits of what could be done for him. And so this advice, do what you can, is both a call to action, right? To do something, and simultaneously an acknowledgement, an acceptance even, of the limits of what we can do. Forrest put it this way: do what you can focuses our minds on what is possible, no more and no less thereby filling each moment of our lives with conscious, practicable endeavor. But you see, I think that we spend a considerable amount of time and energy wishing we could do things that we can't do rather than doing what we can, right? If you're like me, you sometimes drive yourself mad obsessing over problems you can't solve. Or you lay awake at night worrying about situations that are beyond your control. Or perhaps your heart has been broken again and again trying to change a loved one whom you can't change. Amen? It's not only that this pattern will bring us no end of suffering, which it will, it's that the more energy we spend trying to do what we can't, or changing a situation beyond our control, then the less time and energy we have to focus on what is within our control, on doing what we can. I wonder if each of us, all of us, could take a moment right now and just think of a situation in your life where perhaps your fixation on, your regret over the things you can't do or control might be preventing you from doing something you can. Now, maybe you've got a whole list of these things, but for now, just focus on one. What if you were to acknowledge the limits of your ability to act in this situation? What if you accepted that there were things beyond your control? What if you set aside for a moment your regret and frustration that you feel, the sense of powerlessness? And what if instead you did the one thing, just one thing, that is actually within your power to do? What would that one thing be? It doesn't have to be the only thing you do or the final thing you do, but what's the first thing that you can do right now? Do what you can. Now, I don't know about you, but one thing that often keeps me from doing what I can is my stubborn perfectionism. Oh, yeah, I'm hearing some resonance there, yeah. When I find myself confronting a difficult challenge in my life, what I do is I withdraw until I can figure out in my head the perfect and complete solution to the problem I face, right? I try to think it through to the very end, anticipate every twist and turn, every possible outcome. Before long, I'm lost in a maze of my mind's own making, paralyzed. I've allowed the perfect to become the enemy of the good. You know, if there were a list of the 7 deadly sins of good progressive Unitarian folk like us, I think that would have to rank right near the top of the list. Thinking things through just a little too much, right? And making the perfect the enemy of the good, right? Anyone ever been on a church committee that did some of that? Yes, yeah. Or some other group that we're a part of. You know, we're discovering in our anti-racism work that a punishing perfectionism, holding ourselves to an impossible standard, is one of the hallmarks of white supremacy culture, right? A culture that all of us, people of all races and ethnicities, can suffer from and under. Sometimes it can be liberating to lay that perfectionism down and just do what we can. Now, if perfectionism can be a barrier to right action. Well, so can powerlessness. I've got to tell you that over the last decade or so of my ministry, I have sensed among the people that I serve an alarming increase in feelings of powerlessness and despair when it comes to folks' hopes for building a better and more just world. You know, I even heard it in our Joys and Concerns this morning, right? And not without reason. Our planet is in peril. Our democracy is under attack. So many of the people we love and care about live with the daily injustice and often the violent threat of racism and sexism and transphobia, other oppressions. When a shooting happens, we say, oh, another shooting. And it seems like the institutions of our society are unable and ill-equipped to remedying these problems. So it's no surprise that some of us despair of the kind of world that we might leave to our children and our grandchildren, and that we sometimes feel powerless to make a difference. But I got to tell you, friends, this foul stew of peril, powerlessness, and despair is spiritually debilitating, right? And the thing is, powerlessness and despair are precisely what the folks who are undermining our democracy and harming the people we love and profiting off the destruction of our planet, that's precisely what they're counting on us to feel, right? They're counting on us to succumb to our despair, and we can't let that happen. Someone who taught me a lot about this is the Reverend William Barber, the leader of the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina and the Poor People's Campaign. I worked with Reverend Barber a lot when I was in D.C., and he would always tell us that the first necessary and crucial step in any movement of liberation was to believe that it was possible, right? And he called this belief, this faith, cognitive liberation, right? Cognitive liberation, he said, is when people believe not only that change should happen, but that it can happen, and that they have the power to make it happen. And he said, before we can achieve any other kind of liberation, we got to first be cognitively liberated. We got to believe. You know, back in the civil rights movement, when folks marched on Selma and Birmingham and Washington, they sang a song, right? In fact, we sang it last week in church, "We Shall Overcome." It was the anthem of the civil rights movement. We shall overcome. They didn't sing, "Shall we overcome?" Right? They didn't sing, well, maybe we'll overcome. Or if only we were more powerful, we'd overcome. They sang, "We shall overcome." And they sang it with conviction because they believed it. "We shall overcome" is the chorus of a cognitively liberated people, right? And I sometimes wonder whether folks today can sing that song with that same sense of conviction, right? With that same sense of faith in our power to overcome. One strategy for overcoming despair and powerlessness, friends, is to do what we can. To start right where we are and remedy the injustice that's right before our eyes, right? I know many of you are involved in GBIO, the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, building power to work for justice right here in our community. And I'm sure that in your work with GBIO, you've learned what I was taught long ago in community organizing training, that you don't build power and a sense of agency among a people by immediately tackling the largest and most insurmountable problem, right? You build power and agency by achieving one discrete victory for justice at a time, one after another. And then the more we accomplish, the more empowered we become, and the more we can take on. As church folks, we're not going to end homelessness and hunger in our nation. But on Tuesday nights, we can feed those experiencing food insecurity right here in Harvard Square. We can shelter the youth in our community who are experiencing homelessness each night in the lower level. And then we can ask, okay, what's the next step we can take? After we know we can accomplish something together, what's the next step we can take? Start where you are and do what you can. So friends, to close, I just want to come full circle and return to a bit of that poem that I began with. Martha Postlewaite says, "Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue." Friends, in this new year, let's give up our delusions of grandiosity. Let's let go of the fallacy of our control. Let's set aside both our paralyzing perfectionism and our debilitating despair. And let's instead become a cognitively liberated people, a hopeful, practical, and resilient people, and above all, an empowered people. A people who, by doing what they can, come to discover finally that there is almost nothing they cannot do. May it be so, and amen.